Hey guys, how you doing? Today we're going to be looking at the new ways in the new world, specifically the factors that contributed to making the American identity and American culture. So the first question we need to look at is, how did this land become America and what we now know as America? We're doing that. We are going to look at the establishment of the American society, the cultural breakdown, economy, education, government, and values, all the factors that played into making that specific American identity. So looking at this map from 1750, these are the European claims in present-day United States. We are only focusing on the British colonies on the East Coast, but as you can see, you have the French to the west, claiming all of present-day, the center portion of the present-day United States, the Spanish to the south and southwest, and then, of course, the land of the dinosaurs out west, northwest, which is present-day Oregon and Washington State, on up into Vancouver. I say land of the dinosaurs because that's what people actually thought were out there, because nobody really chartered that area. So there were legends of mastodons and mammoths going through. But going back, looking at that land of many people in the eastern colonies, you have a great number of people coming in, bringing many different backgrounds and cultures. So because of that, that now allows for that cultural diffusion. Now, the middle colonies were the most culturally diverse, and from what we've talked about, think about what caused that. How did the colonies lend themselves to become the most culturally diverse? And then looking at the groups that made up those colonies, and think about what they contributed and how we see their contributions today. The English making up the largest, it's 6%. Africans making up 20%, mostly indentured servants. But again, these guys were making great contributions to not only the establishment but the thriving of these colonies and success of those colonies. The Scotch Irish and then Scotch Irish, because these groups were not well accepted in Europe, when they come over and land in the British colonies, they're not well accepted once they land, so they are then forced westward to tame the frontier and lay the groundwork for westward expansion. Now, Scotch Irish, if you're not familiar, they are rejects of two countries. They are kicked out of Scotland because of religious persecution. They're seeking refuge, so they come to Ireland, and then they then leave Ireland because of that same persecution, looking for a better opportunity. They make up what is called the backcountrymen. Western Pennsylvania is a great example of that, and they established that symbol of the frontier with log cabins. The Pennsylvania Dutch, or Germans, are also major contributors to symbols of young America. They are bringing hunting rifles, which play a very large role not only with the frontier but also when it comes time for the Revolution. The Conestoga wagons, and then iron stove heating. The French Huguenots, they're bringing Enlightenment ideas and great works of art and specialty goods. And then the other groups, the Swedes, the Jews, and the Swiss, mainly making up our lovely state of Delaware. They're finding their settlement there. Something to think about, though, what would be the biggest difficulty in the New World with all of these groups living in the same area? Something we'll talk about later, but it's something you have to take into consideration, because some of these groups did not get along in the Old World. It's going to have an impact on them in the New World. And then looking at a chart highlighting the non-native population in North America from 1700 to 1780. The question at the bottom, why would the natural increase have been so much larger than in the past? Think of the factors that are helping with that increase. Now that these colonies are established, they maintain a relationship with England. Now in the southern colonies, they establish a great trade relationship. The rivers are navigable. They also allow for movement into the colonies because their rivers mainly run east to west. They have great crops that are not native to England, so England is looking for those crops and the access to them. The plantation owners can establish their own docks, which gives them a direct line to those traders, those English traders, and after handing off the raw materials on the docks, they can then request goods from England. Some of the hot commodities of the time, new styles, or any type of specialty goods. Teachers, if you can have your child educated by a English tutor, that was shown as a status symbol. Plantation owners saw themselves as English gentlemen. This has a major impact later on, and also on the culture themselves. They take that idea of English gentlemen through the style of clothing, wearing white gloves to show that they don't have to get their hands dirty. Women take that idea of the Southern belle, ladies, and then the connection with England. This plays a part when we get up to the time of the Revolution and how the southern colonies react to the Revolution. Where on the flip side, you have the northern colonies, New England area. The north, their waterways are very rocky. The rivers are not very navigable, and they run north to south. So if you live off those rivers, you're not really getting a good connection with the old country. There's no real staple crop, and because of that, their main trade commodity is fish, which does not sound like it's a very lavish or great commodity to have, but there's such an abundance that New England fisheries, they're supplying England with a great deal because the English fisheries have almost run dry. The codfish is the identity of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The codfish was actually, a codfish was in the Massachusetts State House up until recent times. So it is that symbol. And England wants to make sure that they don't trade with anyone else, so they then enforce navigation acts. Because these New England sailors are looking for other venues to trade their goods. And they're looking outside of England. So because of this this trade relationship and more restrictions, New England is actually looking for new partners and becoming more independent when it comes to their identity, themselves completely as it connected to England. So this new land now equals opportunity, but it also leads to slavery. Because of a surplus of land, you now have the ability to go from nothing to something. You can now identify yourself as a land-holding male instead of just a peasant, which you would have been in the old world. If you can get over there here on your own, that's great. If you cannot fund your own travel, you can get a sponsorship and end up becoming an indentured servant. Now under indentured servitude, you owed 7 years on average worth of work, but after those 7 years are up, your contract would then allow for you to get clothing, tools, money, land, anything that would benefit you and help you get set up in the new world. There are dangers, though, to being an indentured servant. You have a contract that if you were illiterate, you could not read, so there were dangers with signing your life away. This picture, when I Googled indentured servant, this was the picture that came up. I thought it was funny, but at the same time, it's very telling because your life is horrible as an indentured servant. It was very difficult. It was not an easy life to live. But once you put in your time, you were given your freedom. On the flip side, you had slavery. Slavery was mostly practiced down south on the large plantations. Because they had such large plantations, they needed a large workforce, and to make it more profitable, they brought in slaves. Now, slaves were made up of POWs, kidnapped poor, pagans, socially unwanted. You could be, slavery did not have any distinct race, religion, culture. Anyone could be a slave, but African slaves were the most prominent, mainly because they didn't know the territory, and they could easily be brought in through the triangular trade. Both of these groups, indentured servants and slaves, life was very difficult. Both had the opportunity to gain their independence. Under slavery, though, it all depended on the master and if he would free them of their servitude. Now, with that triangular trade that I talked about, that was a trading system that was created to circumvent the navigation acts or navigation laws that were trying to be enforced by the British. But because the Atlantic Ocean is such a large area, it's very difficult to enforce, even though Britain had one of the largest navies in the world at the time. That it worked. Raw materials would be shipped from New England, mainly fish, lumber, and textiles, would be shipped to the Caribbean islands. The Caribbean islands would then trade their molasses and sugar to the New England territories. They would then in turn turn it into rum. Just think of the Pirates of the Caribbean and Jack Sparrow. Enough said for there. They would then take that rum, ship it back to the Caribbean islands, who would then in turn send it to the west coast of Africa. And those kingdoms on the west coast of Africa would then supply those traders with slaves. The slaves would either be kidnapped or POWs from tribal wars and packed on a ship, which were extremely inhumane and just a horrible example of human history, how humans treated other humans. But they would then ship them across the Atlantic to the Caribbean islands, where they in turn would be bought and then sold to the colonies of North America. And then the North American colonies would also have a direct trade with the African kingdoms. Now, because of the trading and that triangular trade, the trading of African slaves now increases the African population. Charleston, South Carolina being the largest slave port, they would then supply the surrounding colonies with slaves that were bought and sold in Charleston. If you go to Charleston today, you can still go to the markets, which are still in operation, but now are selling regular produce and things of that nature. But Charleston is the largest port. Newport, Rhode Island is the second largest, and nobody really thinks of Rhode Island as being a major slave port, but slavery was practiced throughout the colonies. This map just shows the African population per proportion in those from New York down to Georgia. Something to think about is, what impact would that then have on the culture and society of the South because of this large population. And this also just showing you the numbers breakdown from 1690 to 1750. Just looking at the increase, of the population, what impact would this now have on the colonial society? Now, with family life, Families were very large. You had to have large families because of the high mortality rate. You may have 24 kids, or be pregnant 24 times, but only have 5 kids survive to adulthood. So you had to play the numbers game. Childbirth was extremely dangerous. Many women died during childbirth, but women played a very large role working alongside their husbands, serving many roles within the family, and even taking ownership of the family business or farm once their husbands die. With children, your future was dictated by your parents. You did what your parents told you to do. You married who they said to marry, so you didn't really have much freedom within that family. And this just is an example of a tombstone from New England. This young woman probably died during childbirth at the age of 19, but this type of headstone was unique to New England, with the skull and wings showing the victory of the soul over death, something to comfort those after losing a loved one. But these were very prominent. I don't know what you're into, whatever blows your hair back, but if you ever walk through cemeteries in New England, you'll see many of these. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of these, but these are some examples of becoming independent and creating that American identity. Solitary neglect is one of the biggest contributors to this, because England's off fighting their own wars and not really paying attention to the colonies. This now allows for the colonies to develop their own independent governments and culture. So the colonial governments, many different types depending on the areas. The freedom of press and the freedom of speech is established during the Peter Zenger case. That idea is now fostered within America, that you are allowed to do and say what you like, as long as it's not impacting others in a negative way. So that freedom is there. Freedom of religion. The Great Awakening now allows for the choice of religion and also the independence of spirit. Education is a big boost, especially in the northern colonies, where you have the early universities springing up, the Harvards, the College of New Jersey, or Princeton, as it's called today. Many of the Ivy League schools are established during this time. And then, of course, the culture. You have great individuals contributing to the culture. Phyllis Wheatley is an ex-slave. She becomes a very prominent African-American writer. Benjamin Franklin, who is also an ex-slave, ran away from his brother, who was his master, and finds himself in Philadelphia, and from there he then becomes the equivalent of a rock star. People know him all over the colonies and then all over the world, especially when he goes to France during the Revolution. And then, of course, the ideas that are now being spread, Locke, Montesquieu, Smith, Hobbes, they are now contributing to that American identity. And then, of course, the democratic values that are coming out. And again, not going to talk about all of these, but you should know these. These are some examples of that becoming independent and becoming more of a democratic community. So, just finishing up, these are some follow-up questions that you should be able to answer after watching this presentation. Please be prepared to answer and discuss these questions. I hope this helped understand how the American culture was established and all the factors that helped contribute to becoming American. Have a great day.